Ever feel like you could understand yourself just a little bit better?
Hmm.
Like there's maybe a key ingredient to a fulfilling life that you haven't quite grasped.
Mm.
Today, we're trying to find a shortcut to that understanding. We're doing a deep dive into the work of Nathaniel Branden,
Hmm.
specifically his really insightful 1992 book, The Power of Self-Esteem.
Yeah, and our goal is pretty straightforward. Pull out the most valuable insights from Brandon's decades of studying this stuff, self-esteem, so you can quickly get to the heart of what it is and why it matters so much.
It's amazing he started thinking about this way back in 1954.
Mm.
That's a lifetime of thought,
It really is. And you have to remember what psychology was like back then.
right? Branden himself pointed out that when he first started looking, there wasn't much solid research specifically on self-esteem.
You had Freud talking about self-regard tied to early experiences, and Adler focused a lot on feelings of inferiority.
But Branden felt something was missing, didn't he? Like a more direct way to grasp this thing we call self-esteem.
Exactly. And that feeling led him to write his first big book, The Psychology of Self-Esteem, back in '69. A book that's amazingly still in print, still relevant.
Then fast forward to the 80s, and suddenly self-esteem is everywhere. It became a huge buzzword.
It really did. But Brandon saw a danger there. With all that attention, the concept risked getting, watered down, trivialized
Oh,
even.
definitely. We all heard it constantly. Oh, my self-esteem is shot today. Kind of lost its punch.
And that's precisely why Brandon hammered home the need for a clear, precise definition. I mean, if you can't really define it properly, how can you possibly build it or help others build it?
Makes sense. He saw the problem was all these different definitions floating around, making it hard to actually study or improve it effectively.
Yeah, a real challenge for the field.
So let's get into that. What is self-esteem, according to Branden, and where did those earlier ideas fall short for him?
Okay, well, let's look at some of those. Way back, 1890, William James had this formula: self-esteem, success, pretensions.
Success divided by pretensions. Okay, so basically your self-worth is about what you achieve compared to what you, like, aim for.
That's the gist. How your reality stacks up against your aspirations.
Hmm. But wait, so if I aim super low, like really low, and I hit those targets, James is saying that gives me the same self-esteem as someone with massive goals who actually achieves them.
That's the implication. And Brandon definitely took issue with that. He saw James's view as too focused on comparison.
Right, like James's own example of feeling embarrassed if someone knew more psychology than him. It makes your self-esteem dependent on, well, externals.
Exactly. Brandon felt it almost encouraged you to surround yourself with people you see as less capable, just to feel better.
Yikes. That doesn't sound healthy.
No, Brandon argued it's a recipe for anxiety, not genuine self-esteem, making your worth contingent on stuff outside your direct control. He literally said it was to invite anguish.
Anguish. Wow. And that idea about low aspirations equaling high achievement in terms of self-esteem, it just didn't match what he saw in people.
Right. He observed that people with those super low ambitions often weren't psychologically thriving at all. Quite the opposite, usually.
Okay, so James's formula had issues. Then came Stanley Coppersmith. His work is still pretty well known.
Cooper Smith defined self-esteem more as a personal judgment of worthiness. You know, how capable, significant, successful, and worthy you feel.
That feels a bit closer, more intuitive somehow.
Yeah.
Less about direct comparison.
It does. It moves away from that explicit ratio. But Brandon, well, he still had questions like, capable of what exactly? We're all capable of different things.
Good point. And significant. By whose standards? Successful financially, socially, personally, it's still a bit vague.
Precisely. Brandon appreciated that Cooper Smith included worthiness, but he felt it still lacked that necessary precision.
Then there were Bednar, Wells, and Peterson. Their definition was a subjective and endearing sense of realistic self-approval based on accurate self-perception.
Okay, Brandon liked the realistic and reality-based part of that. True self-esteem isn't just wishful thinking, right?
Right, it has to be grounded. But again, Brandon asked approval of what aspects of ourselves and what criteria are we using for that approval. It still needed more specifics.
Exactly. Then you had the California Task Force definition.
Oh yeah, I remember that one. It was something like appreciating my own worth and importance and having the character to be accountable for myself and to act responsibly toward others.
Right. Brandon had a couple of main problems here. First, still vague on worth and importance. But second, and more fundamentally, it includes a source of self-esteem accountability, responsibility, right there in the definition.
Oh, interesting. It's like defining an apple by saying it grows on a tree.
Kind of, yeah. He argued a definition should tell you what something is, not how you get it. He also, let's say, suspected some other, maybe political influences might have shaped that particular definition.
Hmm, okay. And finally, that really simplified version you sometimes hear. Self-esteem means I am capable and lovable.
Yeah, and while feeling lovable is often, linked to good self-esteem, Brandon, again, pushed back. Capable of what? And why just lovable? What about competence? What about integrity? Other key things.
So after picking apart all these earlier attempts, what did Brandon himself propose? What was his definition?
Okay, so in the preface to The Power of Self-Esteem, Brandon gives this really concise core idea. Self-esteem is the experience that we are appropriate to life and to the requirements of life.
Appropriate to life.
Yeah.
Oh, okay, that's
Yeah.
broad, but powerful. He breaks it down more, though, right?
Yes, he does. He drills down into two essential pillars, two key components. First, confidence in our ability to think and to cope with the basic challenges of life.
Okay, so that's about competence, believing in your own mind.
Exactly. That's what he later calls self-efficacy. And the second pillar is confidence in our right to be happy, the feeling of being worthy, deserving, entitled to assert our needs and wants and to enjoy the fruits of our efforts.
And that sounds like worthiness. Self-respect.
Precisely. Self-respect. So his definition identifies these two core aspects of self-evaluation: competence, or self-efficacy, and worthiness, or self-respect.
What's really striking is how his definition focuses purely on the experience itself, that feeling of competence and worthiness. It doesn't muddy the waters by bringing in the causes or the results right away.
Exactly. He wanted to isolate what it is first. And he was adamant that self-esteem, defined this way, isn't just a nice to have, it's a fundamental human need. Basic, powerful, essential for healthy development. He even argued it has survival value.
Survival value.
Wow.
He uses that powerful analogy comparing positive self-esteem to the immune system of consciousness. What did he mean by that?
Think about your physical immune system. It protects you, helps you fight off illness, helps you recover. Brandon saw self-esteem doing something similar psychologically. A strong sense of self-esteem gives you resilience, helps you navigate life's challenges, bounce back from setbacks, deal with adversity.
So if your self-esteem is low, that resilience is weaker.
Much weaker. You become more vulnerable to life's blows. You tend to focus more on just avoiding pain rather than actively seeking joy or tackling challenges. Negative stuff hits you harder, lasts longer.
Does this connect to how he viewed addiction?
Absolutely. He saw addiction often as a misguided attempt to cope with that underlying anxiety and pain that comes with low self-esteem. It's an attempt to self-medicate, essentially.
So people struggling with addiction aren't less fearful, they're actually more fearful.
That was his view, yes. They're trying to find some relief, some sense of calm or control, but the substance abuse, paradoxically, just further undermines any chance of building genuine self-esteem. You can't, drink your way to feeling truly capable and worthy.
And even for people who aren't struggling with addiction, if they achieve a lot externally but still have low self-esteem, it sounds like there's still an internal battle.
Oh, absolutely. A poor self-concept can sabotage effectiveness, kill creativity, and just suck the joy out of accomplishments. You see people who achieve amazing things but feel like frauds or have this gnawing feeling of never enough.
Yeah, I've seen that.
But conversely, when you have that realistic self-confidence Brandon talks about, it's empowering. It fuels motivation, helps you see opportunities, respond effectively. You feel more energized.
But he wasn't saying self-esteem is like a magic bullet for happiness, was he?
Definitely not.
Yeah.
He was very clear, life is complex, we have many needs. High self-esteem doesn't guarantee constant bliss or smooth sailing. But, and this is crucial, he argued that the absence of self-esteem almost guarantees a life colored by anxiety, frustration, and despair.
That's a strong claim. And he saw this becoming even more important in the modern world, right? Not just personally, but economically, too.
Yes, very much so. Think about today's economy. It's driven by information, innovation, constant change. Businesses need people who can think for themselves, manage themselves, take initiative, adapt.
The old command and control style doesn't work as well anymore.
Exactly. You need self-starters, people with self-reliance, personal responsibility, trust in their own judgment. And what underlies all of that? Healthy self-esteem. It's become a vital economic asset, not just a psychological one.
Okay, so let's circle back to those two core components he identified: self-efficacy and self-respect. Can we unpack those a bit more?
Sure. Self-efficacy, for Brandon, is that bedrock confidence in your own mind. Your ability to think, understand, learn, judge, choose. It's cognitive self-trust, believing you can figure things out, cope with challenges. It's that feeling of I can.
Right, the competence piece.
Huh.
And self-respect.
Self-respect is that deep down assurance of your own value, your right to exist, to be happy, to assert your needs and enjoy your life. It's feeling worthy, deserving. It's that feeling of I
There
am.
can, and I am. Nice. And he saw these as totally intertwined.
Absolutely. Self-esteem is the integrated sum of both. If you feel capable but not worthy, your self-esteem is impaired. If you feel worthy but utterly incompetent, same problem. You need both.
And he connected self-efficacy to feeling in control, not like a victim.
Yes, a sense of agency over your own life. And self-respect, interestingly, he linked to a healthy sense of connection with others, not alienation, but not mindless conformity either, a kind of fellowship of independence, he called it.
Fellowship of independence. I like that. So just to recap his core idea, self-esteem is that tendency to experience yourself as fundamentally competent to cope, self-efficacy, and as worthy of happiness, self-respect.
That's the essence. And remembering, of course, that it's not always static. It fluctuates. We're talking about a person's general average level.
Okay, now, Brandon was really big on the idea that authentic self-esteem has to be rooted in reality. Right? It's not just about chanting affirmations or feeling good for no reason.
He was very critical of approaches that tried to boost self-esteem without addressing underlying competence or integrity.
He used that example of American students who rated their math skills really highly,
Yeah.
but their actual performance was, well, not so great compared to students in other countries who were more modest but performed better.
Right. That anecdote perfectly illustrates the problem with misguided self-esteem initiatives. Praising kids regardless of actual effort or results doesn't build real self-esteem. It might create a temporary good feeling, but it's not grounded.
So a student with poor grades could still have some self-esteem if they felt competent and worthy in other areas, but rationally, they'd have to acknowledge their academic struggles realistically.
Exactly. Healthy self-esteem doesn't mean denying reality. It means facing it, including your weaknesses or areas needing improvement, from a position of fundamental self-worth.
And he wasn't keen on the idea of getting self-esteem just from, say, group identity, like ethnic pride, without focusing on individual character and choices.
Correct. He argued that while group identity can offer belonging, true self-esteem is fundamentally tied to volitional acts, the choices you make, the responsibility you take, the integrity you demonstrate. It has to be earned through how you live.
Relying only on external things like group affiliation or affirmations leads to what he called pseudo-self-esteem.
Yes, pseudo-self-esteem. It's like a fragile facade, an illusion of competence and worth that's propped up by external things.
What does that look like? What are examples of seeking pseudo-self-esteem?
Oh, things like constantly needing to be popular, chasing status symbols, name dropping, needing to win every argument, maybe being overly materialistic, or even performing acts of charity just for the look of it, not from genuine compassion. It's seeking validation outside yourself.
Because real self-esteem is fundamentally an internal experience.
Deeply internal and intimate, yes. It's about your relationship with yourself.
So constantly chasing approval doesn't build it, and can actually lead to what he called approval addiction, which sounds pretty exhausting.
Very exhausting and ultimately unfulfilling. Instead, he emphasized listening to your internal signals, your body, your emotions, and crucially, learning to think for yourself.
Okay, and he made a clear distinction between self-esteem and pride, right?
Right. Yes. Self-esteem is the foundation. I am worthy. Pride is the feeling you get from specific achievements. I did this. Authentic pride flows from self-esteem and accomplishment. It's not a desperate need to prove yourself.
He told that story about the successful businessman who secretly always wanted to be a scientist.
Right. He achieved external success, but because he pursued his parents' values, secondhand values, Branden called them, instead of his own passion, he felt empty. He lacked that authentic pride, and ultimately it damaged his self-esteem too.
It really underscores how much our choices, what we're willing to do, shape our self-esteem. He acknowledges upbringing and maybe inherent differences matter, but he really focuses on deliberate practice.
Absolutely. Things like choosing to live consciously, to be self-responsible, to act with integrity. He argued you can't directly work on self-esteem like lifting weights.
Right. It's a consequence.
It's a consequence, an outcome of engaging in those practices. So fostering self-esteem means creating conditions internally or externally that support those practices.
And when self-esteem is healthy, it shows up in lots of ways, doesn't it? How we act, how we communicate.
Totally. Think about someone with quiet confidence. Their demeanor, how they handle compliments or criticism gracefully, their openness, their ability to be spontaneous, how they manage anxiety, even their sense of humor. It all reflects that inner state.
He even mentioned physical signs.
Yeah, things like alert eyes, a relaxed face and jaw, balanced posture, a purposeful walk, a modulated voice. The common thread there is often relaxation, a sign of inner peace, not being constantly braced against threat.
What about having too much self-esteem? People talk about that sometimes. Is that actually possible, according to Branden?
He was adamant. No, just like you can't have too much physical health, that what people call too much self-esteem, arrogance, boasting, needing to put others down. He saw as signs of a lack of genuine self-esteem.
Ah, so it's insecurity masquerading as superiority.
Exactly. Someone with truly high self-esteem doesn't need to prove they're better than others. Their sense of worth comes from within, not from comparison. It's also why, he noted, people with low self-esteem can sometimes feel uncomfortable or resentful around those with high self-esteem. It highlights their own deficits.
Okay, let's shift to the sources, or maybe he called them reflections, on the sources of self-esteem, focusing on what's actually in our control.
Right. The key is judging ourselves by things we can actually choose and control. Are we living consciously? Are we taking responsibility? Are we acting with integrity? He warned strongly against tying our core self-assessment to things outside our control, like what others think or specific external results.
He really emphasized a commitment to awareness, that will to understand. Why was that so central?
Because it's about actively engaging your mind with reality, seeking clarity, trying to understand yourself, others, the world. He saw the very act of choosing to be conscious, to pay attention, as a fundamental assertion of the self. Giving up on understanding, especially when young and the world seems confusing, damages that core sense of competence.
So persisting in trying to make sense of things builds inner strength,
Immensely. It builds trust in your own mind. Then there's the related idea, the will to be efficacious.
which is about perseverance, not giving up when things get tough.
Yes, and refusing to let temporary feelings of helplessness or failure define you. It's about keeping that focus on what you can do. He told that story about the two cousins.
Oh yeah, facing similar tough childhoods, but one kept striving, kept trying to understand and take control where he could, while the other seemed to, well, partly give up.
Exactly. It highlights how our response to difficulty shapes us. He also talked about strategic detachment, a survival skill some kids develop, knowing deep down, this bad situation is not all there is. It's a way of preserving a core self.
It's really interesting that Branden said self-esteem isn't correlated with IQ. It's not about how smart you are, but how you use your consciousness.
Right. It's about the choice to think, to be aware, to take responsibility for your mental processes. And it's not competitive or comparative, it's internal.
Which leads to the importance of thinking independently.
Hugely important. He argued that genuine understanding requires you to process information yourself, not just parrot others. Exercising your own judgment, wrestling with ideas that build self-trust and self-respect. Often, self-esteem is forged in that struggle.
Honoring your own perceptions and conclusions, even if they're unpopular.
And related to that is learning to distinguish facts from your own wishes or fears. Cultivating that intention to see reality clearly, basic honesty, he called it.
Why is that honesty so vital?
Because willfully distorting reality, even to make yourself feel better temporarily, erodes your trust in your own mind. It signals a lack of respect for facts and ultimately for yourself.
Then there's integrity, making sure your actions line up with your values.
Absolutely crucial. Acting against your own judgment, betraying your professed values that directly attacks your self-respect and self-trust. Integrity is fundamental to psychological health.
What about self-acceptance? He had a specific take on that, didn't he? It wasn't just about liking everything or being complacent.
Right. Self-acceptance, for Branden, means acknowledging and accepting the reality of who you are right now, thoughts, feelings, actions, the good and the bad, without judgment or denial. Not necessarily approving, but accepting the facts of your being.
And he saw this acceptance as necessary before you can change.
Yes. You can't change what you refuse to acknowledge. He used that example of the client who couldn't say no to unwanted advances. Only by accepting that this was her current reality could she begin to understand it and find the strength to change. It's about not being at war with yourself.
And finally, self-responsibility, the big one.
Huge. The realization that ultimately you are responsible for your life, your choices, your actions, your happiness, how you use your consciousness. No one is coming to rescue you.
That sounds potentially scary, but also incredibly empowering.
Both. It can be daunting, but embracing it is a massive source of strength and self-esteem. It shifts you from being a passive victim to an active agent in your own life. So ultimately, the roots are all internal mental operations. Choices, not external validation.
Okay, let's move into the final area we wanted to cover. Self-esteem in the workplace.
Yeah.
Brandon saw it as critical there too, right? An economic necessity even.
Absolutely. In the modern workplace, he argued, self-esteem is vital for things like taking appropriate risks, being open to learning and feedback, thinking creatively, and cooperating effectively with others.
Because at its core, it's about trusting your own mind.
Exactly. Which is essential for making decisions, navigating complexity, dealing with change, all hallmarks of today's work environment. He even suggested that a common reason executives fail isn't lack of intelligence, but lack of self-trust leading to indecisiveness.
So good decision-making requires looking at the big picture, respecting facts, but also trusting your own judgment, even if it goes against the grain sometimes.
That was his view. And he also noted that people with healthy self-esteem tend to be more benevolent and cooperative, which makes for better teamwork and consensus building.
And the worldliness piece, self-respect, that's important professionally too.
Definitely. If you don't fundamentally feel you deserve success or happiness, you're less likely to pursue goals vigorously, or you might sabotage yourself, or just not be able to enjoy success when you achieve it.
Makes sense. And feeling capable and worthy reduces fear in interacting with
Oh,
others.
yes, less fear of judgment, less defensiveness. It promotes more open, trusting, cooperative relationships. He even cited research showing high self-esteem correlates with things like generosity and compassion.
He told a story about an unproductive team that turned around.
Yeah, when the individuals started feeling their contributions actually mattered, that their ideas were heard and valued, the whole team's performance improved. It highlights the power of feeling efficacious and respected at work.
And he stressed that real competence comes from that internal sense of security in your mind, not just from external results, which can be predictable.
Right. He used the Chrysler bailout example. If your self-worth was tied solely to the company's stock price, you'd be on an emotional roller coaster totally outside your control. It's dangerous to base your core self-assessment on externals like that.
So especially today, we need to anchor our self-esteem in our ability to learn and adapt, not just what we already know.
Precisely. A commitment to lifelong learning is key, and organizations can foster this by valuing learning, setting high but realistic expectations, and creating a safe space where people can take responsible risks and learn from mistakes.
He also mentioned things like group goal setting, strengthening autonomy, and that managers with good self-esteem are better at delegating.
Yes, they trust others more because they trust themselves. He even floated the idea of self-esteem training seminars in companies to help embed these principles into daily practice.
Challenging people, but realistically.
Exactly. Stretching people, but not setting them up for failure. Ultimately, he circled back to his core message. There are no shortcuts. Genuine self-esteem comes from living consciously, responsibly, authentically, with integrity.
It's the reputation we have with ourselves. That's such a powerful way to put it.
It really is. So wrapping up our deep dive into Branden's The Power of Self-Esteem, the big takeaway is really that self-esteem, as he defines it, is this fundamental experience, competence and worthiness.
And crucially, it's built from the inside out. Through those internal practices, conscious living, self-responsibility, integrity, not primarily from external praise or achievements alone.
Exactly. Understanding that hopefully gives you a new lens, a way to look at your own experiences, maybe identify areas for growth.
It really invites reflection, doesn't it? Thinking about Brandon's definition, competence to cope, worthiness of happiness. Which aspect, self-efficacy or self-respect, feels more resonant for you right now? Where might you focus?
And if this has sparked your interest, Branding wrote quite a lot. For practical steps, his book, How to Raise Your Self-Esteem, might be a good next step. Or for understanding inner conflicts, maybe The Disowned Self. Honoring the Self also covers similar ground to the book we discussed today.
Lots to explore. And maybe a final thought to leave you with. Brandon made the bold claim that self-concept is destiny. If that's even partly true, how might consciously understanding and cultivating your own self-esteem actually shape your future possibilities?
Something profound to consider.
Definitely. Well, thanks for joining us for this deep dive. We'll catch you next time.